Hello, co-creators. Welcome back to this episode of the Co-Create Work podcast. We are looking forward to our conversation today. How are you doing today, Chloe?
I am doing well, and I am super excited about this topic.
Yes.
So,
So I believe in last episode, we shared that we were going to be talking about co-creating humanity at work, and that is definitely going to be coming up. But we have a little break in between, like an interlude, because we just finished and wrapped the very first session of the Culture Crash Course, as we mentioned in episode 1 of the podcast, and probably last episode as well. But we're at the point where the feedback and recommendations and all of those pieces are coming in. And we have been blown away from the students, what they have learned, what they have taken back to their companies already, doing retrospectives, culture audits, bringing leadership teams together for conversations. And so that has been fabulous. But one of the many, many things that stood out and we kept seeing over and over again in the feedback is kind of the saying that that I created and we have really embedded into co-create work, which is that personal transformation leads to organizational transformation. And as we looked at feedback, folks had just written that over and over again and highlighted that it was a big mental shift for them.
yeah,
Because when we go to tackle culture stuff, we often will start like, okay, I need to work with leadership team. I need to do this big organizational quote. We call it an organizational transformation. And we often look at it through that lens.
yep.
Chloe, I know you do direct work with most of our leaders inside of organizations. And so why do you think the personal transformation leads into organizational transformation is so important?
Yeah, well, actually, Lakita, as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that when we go in to do, like when I go in to do leadership training, right? And
Yeah.
and part of we often do it with clients as part of organizational transformation. Even there, we start with emotional self-awareness,
Yeah.
right? Even if we're going to be talking about delegation, whatever we're talking about in terms of management skills, we start with emotional self-awareness. And this piece, it's the same concept, right? Personal transformation not only leads to, but precedes
Yeah.
organizational
It has
transformation,
to.
right? Like we have to have that there. And and the reason being is that if we don't do the inside work, if we don't do that personal transformation piece, we're not in a space, we're not able to do the bigger organizational work because we're going to get in the way,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And I think I learned this really early in my career, Chloe. So went to my first role that was, corporate role, was a sales manager, leading the sales. Actually, I was right before sales manager. So like a little in between phase where you get to practice learning the next level leadership skills,
Yeah.
which is so valuable. And if you're listening in, folks, I want you to create more programs like that because I think it will really help folks develop in their career. So I had this wonderful opportunity. I had 3 folks that I was managing. And as I was listening, one of the main things that we would learn is that you had to ask for the sale. And asking for the sale was, do you want to buy this policy? Okay, it's an insurance policy. And so I noticed that all 3 of my team members would kind of go around and like say the price and not say anything else, or say, you could get this if you wanted to, but if you don't, that's totally okay. So clearly not asking for the sale in the way
Sounds like how I do
that
things still.
in the way that we had been trained to do it. And I was so frustrated. And so, worst leadership moment I've ever had as a leader. I pulled the 3 of them together and I was like, hey, if you're not going to ask for the sale, you might as well not even be here. I know it was a big yikes. And so, and also completely different from my personality, but I
I
was
know. I'm like, I could see
so
me doing that.
I was so frustrated. And so I left. I went home that evening and I felt awful, tossing and turning, couldn't sleep. Woke up the next morning and was thinking to myself, like, hey, where is your accountability in this? If 3 people are doing the same thing, then clearly there is something happening that you're not communicating effectively, right? Or you're not
Common
doing effectively.
denominator.
Yes, is me, right? As
Yeah.
the leader. And so I went back in and spoke with them the next day and just said, hey, I have to take ownership for how I acted yesterday. Let me ask you, right? What is getting in the way? What could I be doing better? Right. And that shifted everything in terms of not just their results, but our relationship together, but ultimately my understanding of what it means to be a leader. So we're saying that's definitely coming from the place of having had leadership failures. You know, I'll speak for myself. I've haven't have had leadership failures, and that there is opportunity to really say, okay, how can I be introspective and really make a shift and change in my leadership?
Yes, and what I love about that, and as we get into the rest of the content of this episode, we're going to be talking about all these things that come up and tools and various different things. But what I love, not just as you're learning, but also like we can change, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't be recording this episode if we didn't believe that we can change, that
Yes.
we can do better. So I love that.
And we talk about so much as well of like an organization's personality, if it has one, right? We don't believe organizations are people, but they're made up of people. And the way things are structurally set up, usually the way an organization operates is heavily based on what the leader is like. We might want to change that, and we are totally down and about that. Our current reality is that it's typically based on the leader. And so if we have a leader who can't take feedback, who isn't flexible, who doesn't have a growth mindset, you know, isn't taking a beat, then we're not going to be able to get the level of change that we would want to see happen within an organization. So remember, and I'm not sure if we talked about this on the podcast, but we definitely talked about this on the in the course, which is that think of systems level change through the lens of like three steps, right? So we have micro level change, which is individual one to one, how I change as a person. Meso, which is like middle. So think of that as our team size, our
Yep.
middle management size. And then macro, which means the organization overall change. And so if we recognize that we have those three levels of change, then it makes sense to say, okay, rather than trying to jump in and immediately fix, quote unquote, fix things in the middle, or quote unquote fix systems at a macro level, how about I start with me? Let me understand if there is something that I'm doing, some behaviors that I am having that is driving this. And we are both leaders in our organization, Chloe, and we always start there. We might say, you know what, this thing didn't work. Is there something I could have done different?
Absolutely.
And that helps us to build better systems and better practices.
Well, and with that, I think, I think about systems and there's a saying, and I'm not going to use it because I feel like it's too strong, but essentially, like what you
Mhm.
put into the system is what you get out of the system. And
Yeah.
so if you have a great system, but you're putting in not great leadership
Yeah.
into that system,
Yeah.
you're not going to get great output from the system. Right. And so that's
Yeah.
at the micro level, we have to start there.
Yeah, we do. And why do you think, I think I'm jumping around a little bit, but why do we think that folks don't start don't start there? Like what is the resistance that folks feel maybe for change?
So I think, and this comes from doing this emotional self-awareness work with folks, I think a
Mhm.
lot of it is honestly from insecurity, from not
Mhm.
feeling confident about their skills, their
Yeah.
abilities, which leads to some defensiveness. And that's where, and we're going to get there, but that's where this growth mindset is
Yeah.
so important when it comes to personal transformation, is just the belief that you can change and you can get better and everyone can get better. No one
Yeah.
is perfect. Right?
Absolutely. I think the position sometimes, again, we talk about how sometimes harmful or challenging hierarchy can be because we have this position or this thought that, okay, because I am the leader, I am always right, or I should always have
I
the
should.
answer,
That comes up
or
so
yeah,
often.
or always be right. And if I don't, then that's a lapse in leadership, or then I'm not being effective. Eventually that builds up over time, whereas maybe we started from a place of, I should have the answers to now believing I am the only one with the answers, right? Sometimes we
Yes,
hear
we've
from
we've
leaders of
seen
like,
that.
yeah, I people don't know what to do. People aren't as invested as I am, right? But that's because we can get stuck a little bit in an echo chamber of, what I believe should happen, whoever you're talking to, if you're talking to a coach, that
Yep.
all of those pieces, you might just be presenting your perspective, your way of thinking about it, and then you can get really stuck.
And that's going right. That ties right back into this like level of insecurity of some sorts. It could be insecurity about your skills. It could be insecurity about your team and their
Yeah.
skills,
Yeah.
right? There's a fear piece in there. And that's why starting with the personal, starting with your own transformation, checking in with yourself, like you can't do change well without doing this piece.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
how strongly I feel about it.
Get into this emotional agility, period.
Yes,
I
yes.
love it. So it's like and I completely agree with this, Chloe. And some of the gaps, right, or that maybe I don't know or don't realize. Sometimes I don't know where to start, maybe. And so what we would say is to think about, okay, when is the last time I'm sorry, when is the last time I'm invested in my personal development? And what have I done? Was I able to get feedback, right? Like, was
Yep.
I able to
Receive
learn
it.
something? Yeah, receive that feedback and have it be a two-way conversation so you're not in that echo chamber. What are some barriers that might come up, Chloe, as people think about embracing change and kind of overcoming this resistance?
I mean, a huge one is that we all develop, and I'm going to get a little into that emotional stuff, right? We all
Yeah,
develop coping skills, and those
yeah,
coping skills have helped us be successful. And they are often the blockers to our future success. So, like, we have these skills that get us to this point, and then once we hit this point, we've got to recognize that it's time to develop new skills. It's time to look
yeah,
at things differently. And so, I'm not coping skills are valuable and useful for a period of time. And when you get to the point of transformation, you really that can be a big blocker and it can be scary. Like it just
yeah,
can be, right? Like it's the unknown. And so that's the other piece. And Lakita, I love what you talked about. Like, when was the last time you got support and feedback and really thinking about who are the people you want feedback from? What's the space that you want to be in to get this feedback initially if this is a new thing for you, if it's a little bit scary. And speaking of things like an executive coach can be so great in this
yeah,
space as far as a personal transformation, like external to your business
yeah.
can be huge because part of it is in a business, we want to show up a certain way, especially as
Hmm.
leaders, and that makes sense. And you need a space where you can not have to show up in that way,
And
right?
say the thing,
Yes,
right? So you
yes,
can say the thing that you are actually thinking and
yes,
be in partnership with someone who will say, okay, like Lakita, I need to challenge you a little bit on this. Or is
right?
there another perspective, another way to think about this and really help? And Chloe, what you're hitting on here, I think we really want you all to listen and understand. In order to do this, you have to have a willingness and an
Yes,
openness to change. So, when we say personal transformation precedes that organizational transformation, what we mean is that we have to be willing to be vulnerable. We have to be willing to get feedback. So we have to have that openness and willingness to speak the truth, right? To
yes,
say
yeah,
what we are thinking, even if it's not a big T truth, like it's our little T truth, so that
yep.
we can be in partnership with someone to then say, okay, there is another perspective or there is another way to think about this or approach this.
And Lakita, you mentioned a retrospective and this, we do that as part of the culture course.
Mhm.
We mentioned in the last episode. PS, we don't actually have a podcast episode where we talk about it. So that's something
Oh,
that
we
we'll
need
bring
to
up.
do
No,
that.
we need to
Yeah.
do that. But in a retrospective, one of the questions is what might we do differently? And I think if you think about this from a personal journey, from personal transformation, is what might I not be like? What am I missing? What am I not
Mhm.
thinking about? Right? What might I be wrong about? Those
Yeah.
are all really powerful questions when it comes to this personal transformation. transformation.
Yeah. And this is, and we want to make sure, I want to make sure I'm being clear. This is not to take down leaders, right? And this is not to
No,
take down your
100%.
leadership.
Yes.
This is really about us coming to you with real talk, which is what we do, because it's the actual challenge that we see. So if you are having a situation where you're like, you know what, my organization or my team is really struggling, what we are saying really clearly is I wanted to ask you to take a step back and then ask yourself some critical questions. Where might I be having an impact here? Is there something else I need to know about my leadership? Are there changes that I can make in how I'm showing up? If you feel completely lost, use tools, right? Chloe, you
Yep.
recommend using a 360, you recommend coaching. Is there
Yep.
any other recommendations you would have for folks?
Honestly, there's a number of books out there that can be really
Mhm,
useful for guiding you through
mhm.
that, and not my intention with this is not to make a plug. Like, we're doing a couple of these books in the book club that's coming
Yeah,
up, but we are.
but we
And
are,
one of
yeah.
yeah, we are. And for this exact reason, right? And so Emotional Agility by Susan David is a great one to start. Connect is another great one, and I'll include it in the show notes with the authors because they're escaping me right now. But
Mhm.
I'll put a couple books in the show notes because that can also be a great place to start. And it gives you space to take in the information, to do reflection, to spend some time doing that. And I think it's so important. And Lakita, to your point around, we're not here to take down leaders. I love, there's a Harvard Business Review article that was published in 2023 that captures what we've been saying for years so
Mhm.
perfectly. And I think it's really important. So the article is the 6 key levers of transformations. And it
That's a good one.
number one is leadership's own willingness to change. And here's what the article says, just short 2 sentences. Many people believe that a leader's job is to look outward and give others guidance, but our research suggests that to help their workforce navigate a transformation, leaders need to look inward first and examine their own relationship with change. So here's a quote from Dr. Patrick Liu in the article. If you are not ready to change yourself, forget about changing your team or your organization.
Yes, all of all of
Right?
that. And so that is how important and vital it is. And I have to say, for organizational transformation, we've been doing this work for years and years. But what we see is that when the leader has taken an introspective view, when they're pursuing a growth mindset, transformation happens a lot faster and a lot easier. When there have been challenges, because we're all going to have challenges, especially as you're thinking about something like a transformation for an organization or a culture. When there has been challenges, it's typically around a leader's ability to say, okay, I believe that change can happen here, right?
Yep.
Because we're not just talking about hard skills, right? We're talking about beliefs as well. If
Absolutely.
I believe I can't trust people, if I believe change can't happen, if I believe my team is not talented, right? All of those are personal changes, ways of thinking that we need to address in order to have the change that we want to see in a company.
Absolutely. And as you were just going through those different beliefs, also going back to what we were saying earlier, if I believe that I'm the only one with the answers, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's a big one. If I believe like I know the best way to do everything. So just examining those. And I want to say too, I don't think most of us have that belief all the time. And I think most of us do have that belief some of the time
Yeah. Some of
about
the
certain
time.
things, right? And so I think it's just always good to check in with yourself and do some introspection and see what's going on for you and what you may want to change and what may need to look different. And this is where that personal transformation, you've got to have it.
Yeah, just taking a beat to tap in and having a system set up for yourself to do this in a way where you can have a feedback loop, right? That you can receive feedback that you need. And we talked about 360 and some other recommendations there. Chloe,
Yes.
what else would you share about growth mindset?
So I was just going to say that growth mindset when it comes to any sort of change or transformation is like number one. And I love, and I'm just going to quote it directly from the person who coined the term, Carol Dweck. In the fixed mindset, everything is about the outcome. If you fail or if you're not the best, it's all been wasted. The growth mindset allows people to value what they're doing regardless of the outcome. They're tackling problems, charting new courses, working on important issues. Maybe they haven't found the cure for cancer, but the search was deeply meaningful. And if we think about that in terms of personal transformation leading to organizational transformation, having that growth mindset, both for yourself at the micro level, but then also as you get into the meso and the macro level, that growth mindset for yourself and that belief that your team can grow, that your organization can grow, that you may make mistakes along the way, right? Like those things are so important when it comes to organizational transformation. So it starts with you. And I think part of that starting with you, and I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, is like
Yeah.
modeling the growth mindset. You've got to
Yeah.
be able to model that growth mindset for your team as well so that they can see it. And if you don't have it, then it's
Then
hard for your team to
it's
have it.
hard, yeah, and it feels like a contradiction. I'm so
Yes.
glad that you mentioned team because I think one of the things that we noticed is that a lot of folks who were in the culture crash course were not at executive leadership
Yeah.
in their organization, right? It was about 50-50. Well, a little bit of a different breakdown because we had consultants as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
But what they said, even based on their level of leadership or authority, whatever they had in the organization, they had a team of two, whether they were just an individual contributor, was that this mindset, that personal transformation precedes organizational transformation, really changed the game for how they thought about culture. As a result, they were more invested in culture change. They then had the perspective of like, I understand what leadership may be going through, what they may be thinking. So it increased the level of personal responsibility that people felt as they were going to do culture change. So that's why your point, Chloe, about the modeling and showing, highlighting this level of commitment to your personal development for your team as you are seeking to do culture change is going to be so impactful because it's the thing that really stood out and resonated to folks as they were part of the course.
Yes, and I love that you named, and you didn't name it just like this, but like perspective shifting. When you
Yeah.
get focused on the personal transformation, suddenly you're like, oh, I didn't see this thing, and maybe this person isn't seeing this thing, right? And it
Yeah.
leads to like, I want to say it leads to optimism too.
Mm-hmm.
Like it
Mm-hmm.
brings in a level of optimism because it's like, oh, I can change. So
Yeah.
can my team. So can those around
Exactly.
me. So that combination of like perspective and we had one person even say, I hadn't put myself in the CEO's shoes.
Yes,
Right. And so
exactly.
because it, she went from a place of like, this organization needs to change to like, what can I change? What do I need to change? Then she got this whole different perspective and it shifted the type of conversations that she was having
So
with the
powerful.
CEO,
Yeah,
right? Like so powerful. And she
absolutely.
was not in a position of authority,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but she could have influence. And
Yes,
she recognized
exactly.
that through this personal transformation journey.
Yeah, it's taken in that power back. It also reminds me, as you were speaking there, Chloe, of like possibility, right? And then you
Yes.
talked about optimism is one of the things we talk about all the time. Maybe one of the things we get challenged on the most because we feel like optimism is a key feature. It needs to be central in your organization.
Yep.
And we get a little bit of pushback on that, which is okay. Because I think we have the conversations and results to highlight that it is a really critical skill and this is not toxic positivity, right? It's a totally different thing.
Totally different.
But the possibility thinking, right? This idea that I can impact change, I can make a difference is really critical and important. And if you are showing and talking about your individual leadership journey, that is going to be really powerful. And storytelling, we know, is really powerful. This reminds me a lot of the change at Microsoft, whether you agree with their politics or not. Satya Nadella totally led an organizational transformation that started from the self, right? He was heavily influenced in how I want to encourage us to have leadership by his personal life, personal challenges, personal experiences, and where he felt that he wanted to change in leadership. So he wrote a book, Press Reset. I don't know.
We'll make
Listen,
sure
we're
it's in
gonna
the
get
show
in
notes.
trouble. I know. We're gonna get in trouble for misquoting these books. We need to do better. I'm talking about me, but we will add it to the show notes. But I think the storytelling piece that was done as he led a company as large as Microsoft through organizational change is really, really helpful as a perspective to take and a real life example of how you can start with the self and then lead to organizational change.
Yes. So we've talked about initially, right? The things you need to do. You just mentioned Satya Nadella, great example as far as that personal transformation. The importance of a growth mindset when it comes to that personal transformation. And we've talked a little bit about overcoming like why we might be resistant.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about like overcoming some of that resistance and how to do that. And one of the things that I love, and this comes from my all like added to it is my training in Gestalt from a coaching perspective,
Mhm.
is getting in your body and noticing like
Yes.
when you're feeling resistance, your body will always tell you.
Yeah.
So my chest will get tight personally, and I know I'm like, oh, something is there. Let's explore a little bit. So that noticing, that tapping into your body is super important. And then being a little bit introspective
Mhm.
about the resistance. Like, what is it? What is it about whatever I'm trying to do that's making me resistant? What is it about this feedback that I'm receiving, so that you can really explore and understand what's going on and then get comfortable pushing yourself a bit, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I love the tapping in and noticing the feelings of the body. So if we could, we started with the overall affirmation, right? Belief or practice, however we want to name it, is that the personal transformation leads to organizational transformation. And we've covered a few different things. So if you're like, okay, what are the steps that I need to take right now? Let's list some of those out for you, right? So first is to start where Chloe just started, which is to tap in. So let's do some introspection. We encourage you, pull out your journal, pull out a notebook, like whatever you want to use, and start to write a list. Where am I strongest as a leader?
Yes.
Where do I have opportunities to improve? When is the last time I felt really frustrated? And is there something that I contributed to that situation, so that we're not just looking externally, but that we're looking internally to see where I could have changed or made shifts? And then the last thing we would have you to do is, in this writing piece, if you need additional pieces of input, is to ask others, hey, and we can do that through a 360, but Chloe will next talk about some of the tools to use.
Yeah.
But ask someone. So if you're not going to do something as big as a 360, have conversations with your team. Where can I grow? Where do you see opportunities for me? And let them know that you're open to receive that feedback. Chloe, what are so we have some of the individual, in our bodies questioning pieces. What are some pieces that folks can do from a tools or maybe systems level to develop?
Yeah, from a tools perspective, and we use them all the time. I love assessments in
Hmm.
general, and even just individual self-assessments, because one of the things I love about it is they are pretty neutral in
Yeah.
terms of they're just sharing data and
Yeah.
information back with you, but it provides an opportunity for you to do some introspection. So from a strengths finder perspective, if you get certain things back, just going, okay, where might I be overusing these?
Hmm.
Because we often overuse our strengths at times. And so that can be a space where like you may not have insight into this, right? And you
Yeah.
think, oh, I've got this strength. That's great. So those assessments can be really useful from that perspective. From a systems perspective, anything in terms of like whatever you have set up within your organization for feedback. So if you have regular one-on-ones, with your team members, make sure that part of that one-on-one is also you asking for feedback, you
Yes.
asking for how can I, and there's ways to ask for feedback that aren't directly like, how am I doing? Give me feedback. Because again, the power dynamic there can be tricky. But you can ask, what support do you need from me? And when they give you that response, take time to really sit with it and think, oh, okay, they're asking me for this support. Are there areas where maybe I'm not giving this support to other people also?
Mhm.
Or can I do this better, differently, et cetera? So there's ways to ask for feedback. But making sure from a systems perspective, if you've got like a regular one-on-one or performance management systems, how are you getting feedback about how you're doing? So thinking about that from a systems perspective. And then there's also just observation, not just observation for yourself, but also like noticing, to your point, Lakita, when you're feeling frustrated, if you're in a meeting, if you're in a conversation, if there's something that's not getting done and you're feeling frustrated, start with you,
Mhm.
right? Did I
Mhm.
explain this well?
Yeah.
Right? So start with you and asking those questions.
Yes, I
How
love
could I have
that.
done this differently?
Yes. And we're not saying that the end result of that questioning is going to be that you needed to change, right? But what we're saying is often we don't start there. We skip to this was wrong, this person misunderstood. And if we take a beat and seek to say, okay, hey, is there a different way I can explain this? Is there an opportunity for growth here for this person? Is the system correct? All in on the process and not on the people. Then after we check those things, then we can say, okay, we've tried that. Now we know that we need to do something that has a bigger systems level change. And that's really critical for us to understand because if we jump in and go to fix someone else or quote unquote fix the system, but we're still having the same inputs, then we're going to break the system again because we haven't made the changes that we needed to make.
Yes, and I wanna give a little, just disclaimer here that, like, and you said this, I just wanna make it really clear.
Yeah.
You wanna make sure you're looking at your own behaviors, and also there can be things that other people are doing as
Yes.
well, right? Like, it's not, because we don't wanna get into that space, and I think there's many of us, especially, I would say you see this more in women where we like want to take it on ourselves to fix it. So
Mhm,
like there's a
mhm.
balance. So just make
It
sure
is.
you want to ask those questions, and you also like, it could be that there's multiple things impacting
Yeah,
the situation.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, wanna be crystal clear on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Totally. Anything else that we want to share with the pod crew here before we close out?
I think the biggest thing is that like, if you're not growing and you're not, thinking about how can I improve? What can I be doing? You're gonna get stuck, right? And
Mhm.
so this is just that call to like, make sure you're thinking about this. Make sure that you are consistently looking at and reflecting on your own actions, your own behaviors, how you're approaching things. Ultimately, the one thing that we have total control over is how we show up,
Mhm,
right? And
mhm.
so it's really important that we're thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think we can't talk about leadership just in the framework of things that can be done externally, right? And so, our biggest want to do this episode was to give you some tools and just a gentle reminder about the importance of introspection and making time for it because you have a lot of things to do. But this is a really critical piece that it's going to enable all of the other things. So, encouragement.
Yes, yes, and talk about it. Talk about
Yeah.
it with your team. Talk about observations, right? Be thoughtful about what you share and how much you share, but I know it has been so powerful for me when I've had managers who are like, "I was thinking about this and I wish I would have done this thing a little bit differently. So let's talk about it." Like it's so powerful to model, to share so that you're giving permission of sorts, especially with the
Yes.
power dynamics, for folks to do the same thing and for folks to
Yeah.
be able to have that growth mindset and for folks to be able to come to you and say, "Oh, I don't really love how I did it this time. I'd like to try and do it again or do it differently," whatever that looks like. So just one more plug there for like modeling and sharing your own journey as appropriate. And in the
Yeah.
last episode, we talked about with communication and authenticity, and we're going to talk more about that in the future as far as like how
Yeah.
much do you share, et cetera. But you can definitely share some of this.
Yeah, definitely. And just think about the situation. And Chloe, I don't know if we want to pause. All right. So there you have it. Some very, we hope, actionable steps. And listen, in embracing change, if we could have done this episode differently, where it would have been even more valuable for you, please email us anytime
Yeah.
at
Podcast
podcast
at
at
CoCreatedWork.com.
CoCreatedWork.com. You can tell this is not a highly edited podcast, friends. But we listen, we're coming in hot, but at podcast at
Yes.
CoCreatedWork.com, we would love
Yes.
to hear from you. And if there are ways that we can make this more actionable and helpful, please do let us know. With that, as always, thank you for your leadership.